36 hours after America declared its blockade airtight, an Iranian supertanker sailed straight through it. Tracking system switched on, broadcasting its position to every screen on the planet, no attempt to hide. Watch this video completely, because the gap between the official announcement and that tanker explains everything. Meanwhile, 121 empty supertankers are crossing the Atlantic toward U.S. ports, and that number is not the victory it looks like. We are going to walk through every piece the military claim, the ship data, and the dollar cost landing in your driveway. Start with geography. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles across, at its tightest point narrow enough to see across on a clear morning. That 21-mile gap carries roughly 1 out of every 5 barrels of oil consumed anywhere on Earth each day. Iran shut that gap down in February. Daily throughput went from 20 million barrels to 1.5 million overnight. Picture 10 lanes of traffic. Iran closed 9 of them. That single visual is your entire supply crisis in one image. Brent crude hit $97 this week. The number is alarming, but analysts say the slope of the climb is what has them losing sleep. Here's the part the major networks skipped over entirely, and it completely inverts the story you have been told. Late Tuesday, CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper stepped to the microphone and made a sweeping declaration. His exact claim U.S. forces had completely halted 90% of all Iranian maritime trade inside 36 hours. The word completely did not appear by accident. It was a pressure signal calibrated directly for Tehran's decision-makers. The subtext of that statement was a blade at the throat of the Iranian economy. We are controlling your survival. Tehran did not issue a counter-statement, did not call an emergency session, did not fire a missile. Tehran loaded up a supertanker, switched on its transponder, and sailed it straight through American-patrolled waters. That ship was the Alicia Chinese Registry, previously blacklisted carrying a full load of Iranian crude oil. Full load means 2 million barrels. In American terms, enough fuel to fill every car tank in Los Angeles County 6 times over. It threaded through the strait overnight, passing 15 deployed U.S. warships, signal actively transmitting throughout. Iranian state media ran the story the next morning. Not buried. Front page, a deliberate, documented public statement. Any person with a laptop and a browser could pull up marine traffic and verify every second of that transit themselves. The Alicia was not Tehran's only move. 4 additional sanctioned tankers completed the same journey in the same 48-hour period. The Christiana, the Merlin, the Peace Gulf, and the Rich Starry all crossed after Cooper's declaration went public. Of those 4, the Rich Starry's behavior is the one that tells you the most about what is actually happening. It completed a westbound transit away from Iran, then executed a full course reversal back into the Persian Gulf. Midway through that return, its transponder went offline, positioned the waters surrounding Iran's Keshem Island. Keshem is Iran's biggest island, decades of history as a staging ground for operations that require no public footprint. The following morning, a second sanctioned tanker went dark at coordinates almost identical to where the Rich Starry vanished. Different vessel, different day, same disappearance zone in the middle of a blockade designed to track every ship. So why is the most advanced naval force in history allowing sanctioned vessels to slip through its enforcement zone? The answer is not incompetence. The answer is a deliberate geographic positioning decision, and it may be the strategy. American warships are not inside the Persian Gulf. They are east of the Strait Gulf of Oman, Arabian Sea. Under that setup, a vessel can complete the full journey from an Iranian port to the open ocean before enforcement kicks in. The 21 miles everyone is watching the most photographed stretch of water in the world right now is actually the soft zone. CBS News confirmed this from a U.S. official. The order targets vessels near Iranian ports, specifically not the open strait. Ships already transiting international water. Already in the strait, those fall outside the blockade's sharpest teeth. Severely disrupted and completely halted are 2 different claims. The Alicia sailed through the space between those words. Now here is the part that reframes everything that gap was most likely built into the blockade by design. Give this 90 seconds, because the logic changes how you read every piece of this story going forward. A naval blockade that leaves 0 gaps gives Iran's government 0 room to politically survive, accepting any terms. A regime that must capitulate completely in front of its own population does not survive the negotiation long enough to sign it. A blockade with visible holes gives Tehran the ability to demonstrate it is not broken while the economic strangulation runs. Tight enough to cause real damage, loose enough to let Tehran save face. That is not weakness, that is engineering. The naval deployment was never designed to be the final answer. It was designed to make the cost of not dealing unbearable. Each hour, those ports sat idle. 90% of Iran's international shipping was strangled at the dock. Billions in Iranian foreign assets, frozen in international accounts since years of prior sanctions, remained untouchable. America's ask on the table in Islamabad, verifiable limits on uranium enrichment with inspectors on the ground before relief. Iran's position nuclear enrichment falls under sovereign authority outside the scope of any negotiated agreement. These are not two bids in an auction that can split the difference. These are mutually exclusive definitions of what a deal means. And yet, what the cameras were not showing, back-channel communications, kept running after the official talks ended. Maximum pressure on one channel, an open door on another, both active in the same 48-hour stretch. Now to the piece of this story that received the least airtime, the China factor, and what Trump actually engineered. A personal letter from Trump to Xi Jinping went out asking Beijing to cut off its weapons supply chain to Tehran. Trump then posted publicly that Xi had essentially agreed language he deliberately framed as wise cooperation. That post was not a message to Beijing. Beijing already had its private answer. The post was a message to Tehran. It said, "Your most powerful potential supplier has stepped back. Your weapons lifeline is gone. You are on your own." China's self-interest made this inevitable. No country on earth buys more Gulf crude than China does annually. When Iran sealed Hormuz in February, China's industrial supply chains felt it before the rest of the world did. When Washington moved to force the Strait open, Beijing had exactly one rational calculation to make. Side with Iran and lose access to the oil corridor, stand aside and get the corridor back. The math was not difficult. And here's the deeper issue that most commentators are treating as a footnote: physical force versus financial pressure. Tehran spent 20 years constructing infrastructure to circumvent American financial sanctions, a genuine engineering achievement. Shell companies layered across Southeast Asia, ports willing to look away, cryptocurrency moving money outside dollar systems. Financial sanctions have a workaround: build a parallel financial system and route your economy through it instead. A warship sitting 50 miles east of Hormuz does not have a workaround. It cannot be routed around with a corporate structure. The tankers going silent near Keshem Island were not in crisis mode. They were running established evasion procedures. Whether those procedures can survive a naval blockade rather than a financial one is what the next 30 days will determine. That question, ships versus banks, is what sets your gasoline cost trajectory for the next 12 months. And now, the 121 supertankers enter the frame, and the cheerful coverage they have been getting needs a correction. That convoy image circulating on American media shows empty VLCCs rounding the Cape of Good Hope toward Texas. The framing is, America is stepping up. American oil fills the gap. American production wins this round. Here's the actual arithmetic, and it does not support that framing at all. Normal daily flow through Hormuz, 20 million barrels. Current flow, after all, workarounds 8.9 million barrels. Daily whole, 11.1 million. 11.1 million barrels per day is larger than the entire daily export output of the United States. A VLCC carries 2 million barrels, roughly equivalent to filling 84 million American car gas tanks in one go. You would need 5 fully loaded VLCCs arriving every single day just to zero out the shortfall. Not the convoy. 5 ships daily. That convoy in the media graphic does not represent 5 ships per day indefinitely. It represents a one-time repositioning event. And the physical bottleneck waiting at the other end of those tankers is the piece nobody's mentioning. The pipeline connecting Saudi oil fields to the port of Yanbu moves 7 million barrels per day at full capacity. The port itself, the docks, the pumps, the berths can physically load 4.5 million barrels per day, full stop. 2.5 million barrels per day disappear into that gap between pipeline capacity and port capacity every single day. The America picks up the slack narrative collapses the moment you ask, what port do these tankers actually load at? This is the data signal that actually predicts your gas price, and we are now 8 minutes in, right on schedule. World oil inventory levels. The stockpiles that buffer supply disruptions are dropping at a historic rate in 2026. Looking at global observable inventory data from 2017 to now, there is one drop steeper than this current one. That drop was 2020 into 2021, because a global pandemic that shut down travel, factories, and demand simultaneously. In 2026, nobody shut down. Planes are flying, factories are running, trucks are moving. This drop is entirely supply side. The inventory drawdown sits at 218 million barrels, a number large enough to fuel every registered American vehicle for 40 days. That reserve is the cushion between where prices are now and where they go if another shock hits the system. The cushion compresses every week. When it compresses to critical levels, markets do not adjust gradually, they spike. Now here's an operational detail from the Navy's own deployment that is not making the defense briefings. 2 ships from the U.S. Navy's tanker security program are currently stuck inside the Persian Gulf, unable to leave. These are American military fuel supply vessels, the ships that keep U.S. warships running trapped behind the blockade. At the same time, the USS George H.W. Bush, the newest carrier in the fleet, is taking the longest route to the region. Not through Suez, not through Bab el-Mandeb, around the Cape of Good Hope, 12,000 miles from Norfolk, Virginia. The reason sits in recent history. USS Truman took a direct collision north of the Suez Canal on the last deployment. Command will not send a $13 billion nuclear carrier through 3 contested choke points in an active military conflict. The detour adds roughly 3 days at 25 knots, but delivers the carrier with no public track record of its movement. Now here's the logistics detail that the Pentagon does not advertise, but that matters enormously to the deployment. The Bush itself runs on nuclear power. She needs no refueling, but her 3 Arleigh Burke destroyers do, at sustained speed of 20 to 25 knots. Those destroyers consume fuel at rates the Navy describes as egregious in its own documents. The USNS Arctic travels alongside a 30-knot gas turbine combat logistics ship built specifically for this role. 2 years ago, in the Arabian Sea, Navy oiler USNS Bighorn ran aground during an active deployment mid-mission. The Abraham Lincoln Battle Group was left without a replenishment vessel, completely without one, in a contested theater. To compensate, the Navy stripped Lincoln's destroyer escorts, creating a window of serious operational vulnerability. If that scenario repeats with the Bush Group in the Persian Gulf region, Navy leadership has described the outcome as cataclysmic. Right now, the active fast combat logistics fleet is 2 ships Arctic and supply. 2 more sit in reserve Rainier and Bridge. Both reserve ships have 10 to 16 years on their hulls. Both could be reactivated. Neither reactivation order has come. The timeline of that decision, against the timeline of this crisis, is a gap that senior officers are watching very closely. Stay with this. The next section is where the 3 separate threads of this story lock into a single coherent picture. First thread. The naval blockade is functionally real. 90% of Iranian maritime commerce is disrupted. Second thread, the blockade has documented GAP's 5 sanctioned ships crossed in 48 hours with trackers running. Third thread, America's own logistics chain has vulnerabilities, trapped supply ships, rerouted carrier, thin reserve fleet. Take those 3 threads together, and you get the actual operational picture, not the one from the press statement. Now the diplomatic track running simultaneously with the naval deployment, barely covered by anyone. While the Alicia was completing its transit, Pakistan's military chief was boarding a plane for Tehran. Field Marshal Munir arrived carrying what Iranian state media described as a message originating in Washington. Iranian Foreign Minister Arashi received him personally on the tarmac, not a protocol staffer, the foreign minister himself. The diplomatic weight of that greeting the foreign minister on the runway told everyone present what the message contained. Simultaneously, Trump stated publicly that new Islamabad talks could begin within 2 days and attached a deadline. The April 11th session had been the most substantive U.S.-Iran meeting in over a decade, 20 hours. No agreement. J.D. Vance and Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi in the same room for 20 consecutive hours. Outcome nothing signed. Washington required verifiable enrichment limits with inspector access before any sanctions relief would be considered. Tehran required all sanctions lifted and all frozen funds released first before any verification would begin. Tehran's third demand ceasefire guarantees comprehensive enough to remove the possibility of a future American strike entirely. The gap between those frameworks is not bridgeable by skillful wording. They describe fundamentally different outcomes. And yet the channel remained open. Messages kept moving. The blockade tightened while the diplomacy continued. Keep watching here because there are 2 additional pressure mechanisms operating that are almost never discussed. Trump flagged that King Charles was scheduled to arrive in Washington a formal royal state visit on a specific calendar date. State visits function as diplomatic deadlines. Every government involved feels the pull of the approaching ceremony. With oil near $100 a barrel, the governments of Europe, Japan, and South Korea were generating daily pressure on Washington. Each ally economy dependent on Gulf crude becomes an indirect lever pushing both Washington and Tehran toward resolution. The full coercive architecture naval blockade, back-channel diplomacy, allied economic pressure, and ceremonial deadline running in parallel. Now here's the cost of all of this, denominated in terms that apply to your household, specifically not to foreign policy abstractly. Gas above $5 per gallon in California. Brent crude at $97 embedded in forward pricing across every commodity. The 30% oil price increase has not yet fully worked its way through groceries, utilities, and shipping surcharges. It is coming. Energy inflation always lags the headline price by weeks, and then it lands across everything at once. Every week, those tankers reroute through the long path from Texas to Asia adds approximately 40 cents per gallon to your cost. 6 weeks of Hormuz closure computes to 40-plus weeks minimum recovery. That equation does not bend for optimism. The reference case here is the 2021 Suez Canal grounding of the Ever Given, a single ship, stuck sideways, 6 days. That 6-day blockage took global shipping between 6 and 12 weeks to fully recover from, 1/10 the current duration. Hormuz has run 6 weeks under active military enforcement mines, armed drones, naval patrol, and government-backed closure. This is not a ship in the wrong place. This is a sovereign nation using military force to control a global energy corridor. Here is the watch protocol, 2 signals on marine traffic that tell you more than any official statement will. Go to the site. Set the view to the Strait of Hormuz. You're looking for 2 specific behavioral patterns. First signal sanctioned Iranian tankers transiting with AIS transponders active and broadcasting openly. Transponders still broadcasting means the blockade is in its managed pressure phase. Diplomatic resolution is still live. Transponders going dark simultaneously across the fleet means the blockade has entered a completely different operational phase. Second signal large, non-Iranian commercial tankers, and which of the two available lanes they are using. If commercial ships shift back to the international lane through Omani waters, rather than Iran's controlled route, that is the signal. Commercial insurers returning coverage to the international lane requires confirmed mine clearance. No mines means that lane is safe. A supertanker picking the Omani lane over Iran's route tells you more about real conditions than any government briefing. Not a signed document, not a diplomatic statement. Tankers taking the old route, that is ground truth. 3 outcome scenarios here is what each one means for your wallet in direct, practical terms. Scenario 1, agreement is reached, mines cleared, international lane reopened, commercial traffic resumes. 6 months to see real price relief. Not next week, not next month. 6 months, because 40-plus weeks of tanker backlog does not dissolve with a handshake. Scenario 2, stalemate holds blockade in place. Talks collapsed. Oil near $97, gas above $5 through year-end. Heating costs elevated. Grocery prices elevated. Every freight-dependent product, which is every product, costs more. Scenario 3, the one nobody in televised media is preparing viewers for Houthi forces re-engage at the Bab el-Mandeb. The Bab el-Mandeb is 1,500 miles from Hormuz, at the southern end of the Red Sea, the last open bypass route from the Gulf. Iran's forces have already struck the Saudi pipeline feeding Yanbu, the terminal that loads ships for Red Sea export. Houthi closure of Bab el-Mandeb removes Yanbu as a functioning bypass. Saudi Arabia loses every export route at once. Iraq's outlets close, UAE outlets close, the entire Gulf oil supply system enters a state of total simultaneous blockage. The supply shock from that outcome surpasses every energy crisis on record since the 1973 OPEC embargo hit American gas stations. Every component required to reach that outcome is already in place and operational. The trigger has not been pulled. Here's the bottom line that neither side's official communication will ever state in plain language. The naval blockade is working and it is not complete. Both of those statements are simultaneously factually accurate. That specific combination, painful but imperfect, is the only configuration of pressure that can actually produce a deal. Enough economic strangulation to make continued resistance intolerable, enough operational room for Tehran to agree without collapsing. The Alicia transit with its beacon on was Tehran demonstrating it was not yet broken. A message, not just a shipment. The rich Starry vanishing at Keshem was Tehran, signaling it still had operational capabilities. A move, not just evasion. What Tehran actually wants at the end of this permanent sovereign control over the toll structure of the world's primary oil corridor. What Washington actually wants, a legally binding, verifiably enforced arrangement ensuring Iran can never repeat February's closure. No clever diplomatic language bridges those objectives. The ships caught between them are carrying global economic stability. Munir was in Tehran carrying Washington's message. Trump had publicly set a 2-day clock. Oil was holding near $100. At the mouth of the strait, 3 more sanctioned tankers had taken up position, neither advancing nor retreating. Everything in the system was pointed at a threshold neither side had yet crossed, and the clock was running. What breaks inside that 72-hour window does not only set your fuel cost for the summer driving season, it establishes the legal and operational framework governing this corridor for the next generation of energy commerce. The only accurate real-time source on what is actually happening is ship position data, not statements, not briefings. Marine traffic, transponder status on Iranian vessels, lane selection by commercial tankers, that data does not lie. Not the podium, not the state media feed. The ship coordinates updating on a map at this moment. The event that has not yet occurred, the first physical American interdiction of an Iranian vessel, is the next chapter. When a U.S. warship moves to physically stop an Iranian tanker, every variable in this story recalculates simultaneously. That recalculation, legal, military, diplomatic, and economic is what the next video covers step by step. Every component, boarding procedures, international law, Iran's response options, and what it means at your fuel pump. That video goes live the moment the interdiction happens, and the viewers who are already here will not miss the opening frame.